You're live, Brad.
I know. I'm just going to give it a minute so folks can hop in. Oh, I see we have some people hopping in the chat. So welcome, guys. People have been asking me to go live for a long time, so I'm actually going to try it out. Forgive us if we have any bugs. It's my first time doing it live, so. But yeah, thanks to everybody who's been tuning into this channel. We've been growing like crazy on here. I remember just a couple months ago, I had like 50K. Now I'm closing in on 100K. So I'm so glad to have you all here. And what we're going to do on this live stream is we're just going to watch this Jubilee debate that just dropped. I don't know if y'all are aware of Jubilee, but their shit always goes viral. I find it very entertaining. It gets catty, but they also like talk about interesting things. So yeah, we're gonna watch it. I'm gonna give you my thoughts. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I see you in the chat acknowledging streaming is not easy. It is way harder than it sounds. Like, you really think you'd be able to just plug in and go live or whatever? No, it's actually quite hard. So I got my producer Senya here. Everybody say hi to her in the chat because she has worked to figure all this tech shit out. And so we're only going to be able to watch this together because of her help. So everybody drop a thank you to her. And now we'll get rolling. And I'm just going to periodically stop this and run my mouth. But I've got my eyes on the chat as well. So drop your thoughts about everything you're hearing and seeing, because honestly, I'm more interested in what y'all have to say than half the people on this panel.
Oh, I'm not going to participate in your delusion. You'll never meet a Republican that uses pronouns. It's just a fact. It's only
Everybody
the left.
uses pronouns. Just some people choose to embellish
Okay, well, my
their
pronouns now for the rest of the time are pretty princess.
That's not a pronoun.
What do you mean?
Those are not even pronouns.
Okay, so what are your
That's
Zize,
grammatic.
Zen, Zer, Ishi?
We are approaching the 150th episode of Middle Ground, and we.
So that was not a great start, to be honest, because everyone does use pronouns technically. But yeah, we'll see.
My former political views were cult-like. Can the agreeers please step forward?
I was gonna say, I think both are just two separate cults, because which is so funny. And I think also sides have like ironically kind of switched, because as a Republican now, I'm like so anti-war. I'm anti-sending money to all these different countries that are not ours, while people are sick from the water and children are starving. Anti-pharmaceutical, anti-big government, anti all these things. And I'm like, that is original liberalism. So I'm like, I think I'm more like independent, but I register and I vote as far right as I possibly can and always will.
I think both sides are very tribal.
Yeah.
But in terms of cult, at this moment in time, I think the left is more cult-like. I was in it for 20 years, what's known today as the woke left, but we used to call it social justice left, progressive left.
Known by conservatives as woke.
Right, but here are some of the characteristics that I think make it more cult-like than perhaps the conservative side. One is that if you had questions, you had to check your privilege, or there was always some line that they would use to get you to stop asking questions, which is sort of cult-like. And then the other thing was there was this encouragement to separate from people who didn't agree with you. And so I slowly over time like whittled my world down to just people who were in the social justice left. And there was really, for people who left, which I did eventually, which was a long process, it's a bit like you become an apostate. You don't just leave or have different opinions. It's like once you leave, you can't come back.
That is a cult. It's like Scientology.
Well, okay, so I relate to this part because I definitely have experienced the far left cultism. I mean, I think both extremes, if you get far enough to the left or far enough to the right, they can both be culty. Let me know in the chat your experiences with cult-like political people. But I, for one, right, I went to UMass Amherst, and folks probably don't know this, but it's one of the furthest left college campuses around. That place was a cult. Like, people were afraid to say their opinions. I remember I took a gender studies class, and one of them, and one of my professors, who I think was a they, them, one of my professors was talking about how the difference between men and women in sports is all socially constructed. It's all just because women's sports get less funding or whatever. And I suggested that perhaps maybe some of the difference was biological. And this room went silent. It gasped. They were like, and the professor was like, it's okay. We're here to have tough conversations. And I'm like, all right, that's when I knew it was a cult. If you go super woke, it is a cult. But I would always have people come up to me after class, because I didn't care how unpopular it made me. I ran my mouth. That's what I do. I've never really given a shit. But so I would do that, and people would come up to me after class, and they'd be like, hey, I really agreed with what you had to say. And I'd be like, awesome, but where were you? Could have used you backing me up a little. And they'd be like, oh, well, I don't want all my friends to hate me. So yeah, I mean, if you can't even say like a mainstream center-right opinion in a community without getting excommunicated, then that's a cult. I'm sorry, that's a cult. I'm not saying all liberals or all Democrats are all in a cult, but I think those echo chambers, when it's like all 90+% one side, you become very intolerant of the other perspective. And so I think that's part of what it is, you know? But I think they're also going to talk about this. It's not like there's only ever cults on the left.
Perspective, because I came from a really religious background, and there's a lot of shame around believing something other than what you're taught. Because of that, it makes you feel like you can't express any questions without being told that you're going to hell, you're going to be exiled from your family. And so when I started thinking a little bit outside of the lines of what I was always told, family members literally to this day will not speak to me, will not look at me in family gatherings where you're just supposed to be like, you're my family, aren't you supposed to love me endlessly? And in turn, they've exiled me because I don't believe the things that they believe.
And I think that's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the other kind of culty. I'm certainly not all Christians, not all conservatives, I know. But some conservative communities, I'm thinking of like Mormon communities, but also other forms of just religious communities, they turn on like their kids if they become non-religious or if they become liberal or whatever, and they excommunicate them or they socially sanction them. And I think that's kind of a good idea of when you're seeing a cult-like dynamic form, is when asking questions gets you in trouble or you're sanctioned for having different opinions. That's never a good sign, and it's a little bit of a sign that you're in a cult-like dynamic.
By the way,
Agreed,
I
yeah.
am ironically like pretty far known as far right in my community, and then ironically very leftist at times because you can't please everyone. But I have never cut off a person because of their political beliefs in my life, but everyone on the left did it to me.
I will say from my own experience, but coming from the opposite. So especially when the George Floyd incidents were happening, it was kind of, you know, a consensus that you should be BLM, rah, 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 all cops are bad.
Everyone
and
has
just
to put
me
the black
questioning
square
that
up
within my own
on
circles.
Instagram.
It's like there's a lot of pushback, and it feels a little awkward because I'm just, you know, it's literally just asking questions. If I did have to, you know, point a finger, I would point it at the left or the liberals for feeling attacked by words that are said on the other side. Because there's not a lot of, you know, conservatives that are like, oh, you said there's more genders, I'm offended. I'm personally attacked by that.
That's literally only one side.
Yeah, it is.
Can the disagreeers please step forward?
I honestly think that both sides have very tribalistic tendencies at a time. As far as the
Oh, I know
question,
who
like,
that
were
is.
my beliefs
That's Hunter Avalone. That's really interesting. He used to be like a huge right-wing YouTuber, and now he's a liberal. Interesting that he's in this. I didn't realize.
personally cult-like? I don't think that I was in a cult. And I mean, even I think you mentioned that like conservatives don't get offended by speech as much, but conservatives get offended by pronouns. They got offended by Mr. Potato Head. They get offended by all kinds.
Really stupid things.
Yeah, they get very
Like,
triggered.
barely
also.
anyone
For
got
me,
mad about
leaving
Mr.
the,
Potato
when I
Head.
left the right, that was something I noticed because I started off as like
that was
anti-SJW, triggered feminist stuff, and I'm like, the right is kind of becoming this way too a little bit with some things, like very offended and triggered.
I would like to push back a little bit about conservatives being offended by pronouns. I think it's more so that they are being forced and to acquiesce to the pronouns of other people, which is, you know, a form of, you know, controlling speech.
Well, don't conservatives get really mad like when the whole pronouns and bio thing?
No,
They're
like,
oh, look, you have pronouns.
I get what both of you are saying, because my thing is like, why would I ever care if you have pronouns in bio, but I will never call you by
I think it's
them?
more that people just view it as a tribal.
All right, so some thoughts here. I do think conservatives can be snowflakey sometimes. I even think in hindsight, like with Colin Kaepernick, they were too snowflakey about that. But when they're mad about pronouns, it really is often other people trying to force them to use their pronouns. I don't think conservatives, by and large, maybe some do, but get mad about other people using silly pronouns. I'm just not going to do it. Like, I'm not going to go along with your Delulu if you're going by pumpkin/pumpkin spice pronouns. You can do that, but I'm not. And so I'll only get mad if you try to make me do that or push that on me or push that on kids. That's why they get mad. Also, the pronouns in bio thing, I will admit, like, there's always an exception. So it's never 100%. But like 95% of the time, if somebody has pronouns in bio, it tells you a lot about them. And it typically tells you they're going to be kind of a narrow-minded social justice lib, just being honest. And that's not being triggered. That's just observation from experience. The nastiest comments I've ever got in my life are from people with pronouns in their bio.
So in the same way that someone might view, oh, that person has a cross in their profile.
Yeah, I mean,
faith.
like, I've definitely, like, if I see pronouns in someone's bio, I'll roll my eyes. It doesn't mean that I, like, hate the person or not, but it is going to signify to me, in 95% of cases, I'm going to know exactly what
I know exactly who you are almost, so I'm just going to stay away
I'm
from
going to
you.
assume that you know a bunch because someone has
why,
pronouns
though?
in their bio.
Because I'm not going to participate in your delusion. And my thing is, like, you'll never meet a Republican that uses pronouns. It's just a fact. It's only
Everybody
the left.
uses pronouns. Just some people choose to
Okay, well,
announce
my
their
pronouns now for the
pronouns.
rest of the time are pretty princess.
That's
And if
not
you
a
didn't-
pronoun.
What do you mean?
Those are not even pronouns.
Okay, so what are your
That's
zize,
grammatic.
zem, zer, he, she?
Yeah, I think that pronouns.
Okay, she just... she didn't... Everyone uses... She didn't articulate that well. Everybody uses pronouns. He, him, and she, her are pronouns. What she meant was, like, different special pronouns, the neo-pronouns and all that, which are nonsensical and I don't use. But she did not phrase that well, so she kind of gave Hunter a layup there to dunk on her. So not a great moment for her.
Sorry, I want to pull it back to Colt.
Yes.
Okay.
Circling back to the cult idea, we kind of straight and went to pronouns, which I think is, again, it's like a kind of a hot topic. The media really makes you believe that one side is more of a cult than the other. That's all subjective. Some of the people that are on my side, it's cultish, but it doesn't mean everyone is.
Well, let me give you.
Honestly, kudos to her for admitting that people on her side can be cultish, because a lot of people will not even admit that their side ever does anything wrong. And if you actually think one side is 100% good and the other side is 100% bad, you're probably not really thinking critically. Oh, Ghost Cruncher. Everyone uses pronouns, but not everyone makes a huge deal about them. Fact check. True. And even most everyday trans people actually don't make a big deal about pronouns. It's weird TikTokers who do that.
An example, like, because I agree with you that the media is fomenting these, like, right side, left side cults. 100%, I agree with you.
Yeah.
So, like, when I, quote unquote, like, left the left, it was because I had begun to question the policies that were surrounding the whole COVID situation. And I experienced cultishness on the left and the right, for sure. But what I found was, if there were people who were willing to listen to me, they were like 95% of the time they were on the right. About, like, I think the government is trying to control us. I think that they're trying to force us to do XYZ things. I only found ears on the right, except in maybe 1 or 2 cases. So like for me, I was like when the prompt is like, oh, the left is, or your former side is a cult. That was very visceral to me. There was a section of the right that I could talk to, and they didn't feel like there was a section of the left.
Well, you can always talk to me about it sometime if you want.
I was gonna say,
I'd be
me
more
too.
than happy to talk to you about the
more than happy
COVID
to
stuff.
have
Thank you, my friend.
It is nice how like in these Jubilee debates, even people who are like can be very toxic on the internet, they're very nice in person most of the time, except Blossom on that trans debate. Blossom was not nice, but most of the time when you actually get people in a room together, they're nice. You know, it's easy when you're just tweeting to like write somebody a nasty gram or call them names, but when you're face to face, you can have a lot more civil discussion, and you are much less likely to just start insulting or attacking each other or whatever. And that's why I like these Jubilee videos, is because they actually get them in the same room. And then you can have a much more meaningful and less nasty conversation than people going back and forth on Twitter, like blah, 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 blah. Like that is almost always goes toxic really fast.
I think Trump will win the next election.
Oh, let me know what y'all think in the chat.
Hey.
Is Trump gonna win?
Love Trump. I think he's the greatest president we've ever had. And I love him. I've loved him for a long time. Personality, everything. I will say, the more they
Personality? Policies, maybe, but personality?
do this witch hunt after him, he just keeps getting more and more popular. And now that we have free speech on Twitter, you cannot deny that people love him. Like the Black community's coming forward, and it's just funny because I love watching them go after him because I think elections at this point are 100% fake and rigged. I just watch him rise in popularity.
No, sweetie, they're not. He lost in 2020. I'm sorry, he did. He did.
Huh?
Are you going to think that if he wins?
I mean, with the entire world against you, I'd be shocked. But I just think now it's harder for them to hide it.
Yeah, I mean, I had major TDS for his Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
a lot of people on the right have it. They were like
Oh my
obsessed
God.
with him and crazy.
It's the cult thing.
Yeah, it's a cult thing.
I had major Trump derangement syndrome through pretty much his entire first presidency.
I will never forget. TDS is such a real thing because I have never supported Trump, but I was able to say, all right, I like this thing. I don't like that thing. When he was president and he did his tax cuts, Democrats actually argued that his tax cuts would kill people. Not like metaphorically, like actually kill people. And I was like, okay, this is Trump derangement syndrome. Oh, Rebecca says, how can he from jail? Isn't that where he's headed? I actually think, first off, you are allowed to run for president from jail. And 2, I think Trump could win from jail. I do. Would I vote for him? No. I could totally see him. That is how asleep Joe Biden is. That is how abysmal his record is and how much people are dissatisfied with how they've fared. Yeah. Mark my words now. Like, that could actually happen. Trump winning from jail. And you know what? Frankly, that's the America we deserve.
Except I was a little softer towards the middle of 2020. But even so, I didn't really come around to liking Trump until after he was president. I went totally like Republican in my viewpoints, but I think that like I came around to liking him unfortunately after his presidency because I saw what we got next. And so now at this point I'm voting for Trump in the primary.
That is not a good way to actually decide something. I didn't like him when he was president, but I like him now because this is so much worse. That's like a reverse polarization logic. Because one thing is bad, you don't therefore have to support the opposite extreme. That's kind of tribalistic logic. There aren't actually only 2 options in the whole world. There are only 2 worldviews. It's more complicated than that. And I don't think it's very intellectually rigorous to simply seesaw from one side to the other like that.
In the general, God willing.
And my life was way better then.
My life was way better.
And I could afford things.
I'm concerned that
That's the best argument for Trump. Simply think about what your life was like in 2018 and think about what it's like now, which is better. most people, it was better in 2018, 2019. The economy was before all this inflation, all these wars happening around the world, gas prices, everything. It was just a lot better. And that's not 100% due to Joe Biden. A lot of stuff goes on in the world that's not just in our control, but a lot of people do vote that simply. And that's a strong case for Trump, actually.
Going to win as well. And I don't think it's because he's the greatest president we've ever had. I think it's because the Democrats have a branding problem. And I think Trump is a brilliant marketer, and I think he's a brilliant con man, and I think he's done a fabulous job making the case to the people who love him that he's going to do what they want him to do, even though he doesn't. So I think he definitely can win. I think they're both wildly unpopular, both him and Biden.
Totally.
I think that there's not a lot of great options. I think the vast majority of people voting want another option, and I do think that his base has more enthusiasm than the Democratic base does.
I think it's funny you say that because I think that about the right. I think we have the worst branding issue in the world. I think the right is so tacky.
The Republican Party does. Trump doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think the
Trump's a
Republican
great
Party
marketer.
is just so tacky, 20 years behind. But it's funny because I'm watching far left people come onto like my side now, and I'm like, it's starting to shake things up. But it's funny because I think if there was another option between him and the current vegetable we have, and also Kamal is so unpopular, like you just have double trouble with them.
The Democrats aren't. They're not putting up a viable option. I think
RFK I thought was
I think the
amazing.
worst thing that the Democrats did for themselves was like push RFK out of that primary process.
Who I love, by the way.
I like him too. And now he's running as an independent.
I'd like to start off. I really do hope Trump wins. I think it's for the best interest of America that he does. Unfortunately, I do fully believe that the Democratic Party is a bunch of political terrorists, and I do believe that they will do whatever they can to steal the election. You know, it's a hot take, but from the last election with the ballots,
All right. It's giving Delulu, my friend. The Democrats are all political terrorists. Let's not be so quick to call people terrorists, okay? Come on now. And look, they're not going to steal the election. They didn't steal the election. They literally can't. The elections are run by the states and localities. They're not even run by the federal government. The Democrats want to pass legislation that would federalize our elections, but they haven't, and they can't right now. So like the states that they say are stolen, like Georgia, was literally run by all Republicans, a Republican Secretary of State and governor. Like, make it make sense. But this guy is a good example of how he was on the far left, and then he swung all the way to the far right, and so he doesn't actually have nuanced thinking.
really don't think they're going to make it
Trump,
easy.
like, called and said to find fake ballots?
I mean, there's a longer call that you could listen to that debunks everything. I mean, he's not going to end up in jail. All of that is just a hit job. But I do think the Democratic Party would rather die than have him in power, and I think they could do that because people aren't aware about the ballot fraud that's going on.
Quick on that, on the voter fraud comments that you made. Like, what about yesterday? Sidney Powell just pled guilty to 6 counts of the conspiracy in Georgia against the election there. So that's actual fraud that was committed on the right side for Trump.
There's probably on both sides then, but I would say it's much more in the favor of seeing that, during the election count, they pause it and they, mail-in ballots for Joe Biden.
I also think we shouldn't take
mail-in ballots have historically skewed Republican. I mean, this dude, he's just drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm sorry. He's just drinking the Kool-Aid. By the way, guys, a Jubilee is totally going to strike this and demonetize it. So if you want to support this at all, please do leave super chats, and I will read and respond to any super chats you guys leave.
guilty pleas at face value because the justice system really
that would be believing the rest of the system, which I don't believe any of it. So I guarantee there's fraud on both sides, and it's
for sure.
And I think it's all corrupt.
I agree.
I don't think he's going to win. I agree with you. I don't trust the last election results, but I actually don't trust any presidential election results since Kennedy. So I don't. I think I am going to vote because screw them. I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna allow them to instill apathy in me. But I don't really put a lot of stock in national elections anymore, and I think local is more important. So I think that they probably are gonna not give it to a Republican this time around.
Religion played a part in changing my beliefs.
join our Middle Ground Patreon to watch this exclusive
Oh, of course. That one's behind the paywall.
Democrats are more compassionate than Republicans.
All right, let me know in the chat. Do y'all buy that? Democrats are more compassionate?
Fancy meeting you here.
I was waiting for someone to say something. And you know I hate it. You know I don't want to be sitting here. I will say, I do think the left tends to be more emotional. I would assume that that would come with feelings of empathy. And I will say, people on the right, I am not actually very popular on the right. As soon as you disagree on certain things, I mean, the death threats, the
You're
hate.
woke.
Yeah. Oh, so you're liberal now, and I'm like,
That's what
and
I
there are
thought.
certain things like abortion's a hot topic. I think it's a little crazy and it's a little too far. I would hope that in the future I become a more middle voice in the Republican Party. But I do find in general, like people on the left, I think because you're more emotional, inherently you're gonna care more about people's feelings. I'm not really one to care that much. That's why I'm on the other side, you know what I mean? But I'll give you guys that credit.
I actually agree with what you're saying a lot because they've even done like literal brain scans and they can actually predict people's political beliefs based on their brains up to like 80 to 90% accuracy. Like it's insane. And so I think, well, you're right, that people on the left do tend to think more so. I think it's with their left side of the brain that has more emotion involvement, which can be both a blessing and a curse, I think, at times, because politics are also about factual information. And so feelings are obviously not all that matter. But yeah, Democrats do tend to be more compassionate at the end of the day.
Yeah.
All right, nope. Sorry. Time for me to sound off on this. You are not more compassionate. Democrats and progressives broadly, often, not always, are the ones canceling people for bad tweets and taking away their livelihoods and their ability to feed their kids. I'm not saying the right is compassionate on everything. I mean, look at the way they talk about immigrants, the LGBT community sometimes. But the left is not compassionate just because they want to give you free stuff, free, and at somebody else's expense. It's not generous or compassionate to vote to give away someone else's money. And the left is not compassionate when it comes to the people who their policies hurt. They just think certain groups are going to help and then that they support. Look at like student debt cancellation or whatever. They're not compassionate for the taxpayers who worked hard to avoid debt and are now going to have to pay other people's bills. They're compassionate for their voters, the people that support them who are going to get the money. Are they really compassionate to the marginalized groups that they say they support? I don't know. I think some individual Democrats or Republicans may or may not be compassionate, but the idea that progressives are more compassionate overall, I mean, no. Republicans actually give more to charity. That's an interesting statistic. But the idea that you're a compassionate just because you are more progressive in your politics, no, ma'am. I have received far more death threats from progressives than from anti-gay conservatives. I'll put it that way. I think both types of people can be both types of things.
Yeah, and when I was on the left my whole life, and like I was literally an emo kid. So it's like funny being on this side now. Now I kind of like I'm a lot more analytical about things. I try to cut the emotion as honestly a survival tactic at this point.
I agree with that too, because for me in my personal journey, it was very close to that. Like my mom used to tell me that. She's like, you have like zero empathy. But I feel like as I went through my journey, not just like transitioning in politics, but just like I went through my own kind of self-discovery journey. And I feel like empathy really came into play there. And as I started to listen to stories from people that had lived experiences, I was like, wow, I really do feel for them and I can put myself in their shoes. And I feel like now I'm even maybe an empath. Like I'm very much.
You can totally gain it and you can totally lose it.
Yeah.
Totally. It's up to you.
Yeah. But I do feel like since that, I feel like, I am so much more compassionate now towards, humanity in general and people. And as I gained empathy, I became more liberal.
I think Democrats are much more concerned with like social programs that help people who aren't themselves. And I think that they often are the leaders of the civil rights movements of our time. And I think those things and leading policy with people first, I think is a bigger priority for them.
Okay, but the problem with what this guy is saying is that the policies, the social welfare policies or whatever, they don't actually help people. They trap them in poverty. They create unemployment. They slow economic growth. They stifle capitalism's growth and progress. All these things. It's not that we're heartless and we don't want poor people to be helped. We just don't want more big government problems. We did the war on poverty for decades and poured trillions of dollars into it, and the poverty rate barely budged. It's not that they're more compassionate because they support more welfare than we do. It's that we disagree that actually works. So we still care about the people. We still want to help them. But just the fact that we don't support more free everything and more welfare is not a good argument that people on the right are less compassionate.
And it's not to say that Republicans don't have empathy or compassion. I just don't think it necessarily leads their politics.
So Jonathan Haidt has a great book called The Righteous Mind, which I think everyone on this panel would love it probably. But in that book, he's trying to figure out, I think the subtitle is Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And he divides morality up into different types of morality. One of those types, the one that liberals and conservatives have in common, is the care-harm principle. They both care about people. They both don't want people to be harmed. But the difference is that they have different definitions of what's going to harm people and what's caring for people. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really interesting. When I started leaving the left, I thought, oh, Republicans don't care about people. That's why they oppose raising the minimum wage. And it wasn't until I started listening to other points of view that I realized, oh, they oppose raising the minimum wage because they think it's going to harm people, because you're going to get fewer hours, fewer
that's
workers,
such a good example.
people are going to get fired. And so it's not that we disagree, liberals and conservatives, on the why. Like, we agree on that, why we should care for people. We disagree on the how.
I agree with that.
Exactly. That's such a good example of the minimum wage. It's like, oh, well, liberals are more compassionate because they want to help workers. No, ma'am. No, Susan. No, Kevin. It's that we disagree on how to help workers. I don't think it helps workers to price them out of the job market, to leave them unemployed, to see their hours cut, or to see the prices at the places they shop go up. So exactly, she made a really good point there. That's not. It's not that we're not compassionate. We don't want to help people. It's that we don't agree that their compassionate sounding policies actually achieve that goal.
100%. But adding more to that is, my way of showing compassion would be to tell someone that pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, you have more potential, and you can do this, as opposed to someone saying that, okay, the government should step in and, support you and do X, Y, Z for you, which in the grand scheme of things isn't going to benefit that person. It's going to teach them that they can rely on a bigger being to be, their support system. But if you learn how to pull yourself up, I think you can be more equipped to go throughout this world in a successful way.
Can't both things be true? I don't feel like liberals are telling people that they need someone to pick them up and that they can't do it for themselves. I think they're saying that there's inequalities in the world, and that there's structures in place that put people in a position to where they can't get the life or the things that they want, the things that they deserve, and they can do both at the same time. You can pick yourself up and you can accept welfare. And I think that there's a lot of
But sometimes you can't, though, because, for example, I mean, during COVID, they made supercharged unemployment benefits that paid more than work for a lot of people, and you could literally only get them if you weren't going to get a job. If you got a job, you couldn't get them anymore. The same way there's this welfare cliff that if you earn more money or you get a promotion, you'll lose more in benefits than you stand to gain. So sometimes they trap people in the system. So it's not like, oh, well, we can help you and give you a hand up. Those two things don't always go together. And the other thing that these folks don't seem to realize is there are inequalities and barriers, but most of the time, those are often created by the government. Like, the civil rights era was only necessary because the government enacted racial discrimination and forced it into society. Like, segregation was codified into law. When you have free markets and free people, there will still be some inequities and inequalities because people are different, right? Some people work harder than others. Some people are, more skilled naturally than others, or have certain talents that are more valuable. However, it's not that the inequalities can only be fixed by the government and they're a natural creation of free people. Oftentimes, like, monopolies only exist because of government carve-outs and handouts. So I think this guy, I get what he's saying about inequalities existing in the world, but to think that liberals have the solution to all of that I don't know about that one, man.
Programs that people have benefited from, even just the ability to feed their kids. It doesn't mean that this mom is all of a sudden going to not work because she's getting welfare. She's probably already has 2 or 3 jobs.
Talking from my own experience, I think if I'm being told, as I was, that I am oppressed and that there are systems against me, I am not going to have the same capabilities of lifting myself up from that if I'm maintaining the mindset that I am oppressed and that I can't do something. Instead of saying that I could have done better, I'll be like, oh, the system's against me. I am
I feel like black people are told not that, they're told they have to work twice as hard, so they do. I don't think that black people don't try because they're told that they're oppressed. I think that they are told that you're gonna have to do more because of discrimination.
Yeah, I think in terms of like, compassion, I think that like on the right, there's more like a tough love kind of thing where it's like, you have to do this for yourself. We can't do this for you, but we want to encourage you to like take initiative and you can be whatever you want to be. And I think, on the left, it's like, well, we need to help everybody to, realize their full potential. I think both of those things can be compassionate in different ways. And I think to a certain degree, you need both mentalities.
Exactly.
Like I think we need to find middle ground and say that on both sides are finding compassion, I guess, in their. That's why I didn't step forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Changing sides was traumatic.
I never changed sides. I've always been center right. So I didn't really have this experience. The whole like I left the left or I left the right.
Very,
That
very,
was
very
not me.
traumatic. I've grown on the belief, that black people are systematically oppressed, and that does a lot for a young person's perspective. And when I started to, listen to the other side, and I started to dismantle that within myself, I felt like my whole life was really a lie. Not only that, but I was also a pretty big ally of the LGBTQ community. And then seeing transgenderism dismantled in front of me was also very discomforting because I have transgender family members and I was very pro LGBTQ, and it's just feeling that like everything's just crumbling down. It took me a lot of time to cover through it. So it was, I remember the feelings very vividly.
I mean,
All right, I'm sorry. To call that traumatic is a bit much, my dude. Traumatic is like war veterans or people who experienced forms of, assault or other things. I mean, you can have traumas that are less significant than that, but to say like, oh, I had to rethink my worldview and that was traumatic, and give me a little bit of a break. I'm not going to play the world's smallest violin for you there, my dude. Also, he's like, I used to be an ally. Now I hate those alphabet people. Like, oh, okay. You're a very well-dressed man to be hating on the gays, is all I'll just say. So
I have a different perspective because, again, we kind of are on different sides of that spectrum. I was raised militantly in religious and political ideologies my entire life. And when I was 20, my sister was killed in a car accident. And because of that, and that extreme trauma that happened that had nothing to do with my ideologies, it allowed me to open up my eyes to the struggles that other people were going through, because I had never experienced something of that devastation before. So I opened my eyes to like, what else is going on that I'm not aware of, that I've been in this bubble being told that, no one else is oppressed. I was just told that they weren't real and that I had to be steadfast with my beliefs. And if I questioned them, then, there was this fear and guilt associated with it. And it caused an immense amount of trauma that I'm still desperately working through to this day.
I'm sorry for your loss. It's horrible.
Yeah.
yeah, that's actual trauma. That's actually trauma. Losing a loved one like that is actual trauma. Not, I changed my opinions and it was confusing. Come on now.
It's funny because we're on different sides, supposedly, but we have a lot of similar experiences because the social justice or woke world, I was in it for about 2 decades. I worked with comedians who also were woke and pushed woke beliefs in their comedy. And I really was a true believer in it. I thought it was about ending racism and sexism. And when I started to question it, it was like your whole world crumbling. I lost a lot of friends. They weren't friends, they were allies. That's the way I think of it now. I ended my career and changed my whole perspective. And I think the reason it's so traumatizing, to use that word, is because it's not just like you're changing one opinion on one issue. If you think of your belief system as like a house, you are literally bulldozing your whole house to the ground and starting over with brick by brick. What do I believe about this thing? I don't have an opinion yet on that because I'm trying to read about, I had limited myself in so many ways of what I was allowed to listen to or allowed to read, or, within that cult, there are people that you just don't listen to. I had never listened to a lot of conservatives, so.
That's all well and good. Still not trauma, though. Still not traumatic. I do think, like, everybody, it's not just this person or just this panel. We're using way too much therapy speak in everyday conversation about things where it's actually not appropriate. It's like this creep of, oh, that's my boundary, or, oh, I'm just, that's my mental health condition or something. And it's like, you mean biting your nails? That's not a mental health condition, Susan. It's like if people are way over dramatizing and way overdoing this. I was traumatized when I discovered philosophy. Oh, okay. Exactly. And my mom dying in front of me was traumatic. Switching political parties is not. Oh, I'm sorry, Jen. Yes, actually traumatic. Yeah. Right.
And that's a problem in and of itself, too, is I think to have a good understanding of just society, of people of both sides, you have to be able to listen. I think not being able to inquire about why someone believes something that they say and then have a confrontation about it is why there's so much division.
I think something I've learned through this whole ordeal is
that's true. And I'm glad it was a liberal person or a left-wing person who said that. You have to be able to listen to other people, even if their ideas make you uncomfortable or really upsetting. It's like, that's part of being an adult. If you are one of these people that melts down if you hear an opinion because your safe space is violated or whatever, yeah, it's part of life. You got to be able to listen and sit with ideas that make you uncomfortable.
Is that anyone, anywhere, on any side that tells me not to ask questions, I'm going to immediately ask questions.
Of course,
like, you know what I mean? And
you should be able to.
Yeah.
You should be able to ask questions on either side and just not feel like there's going to be daggers thrown at you for it. I might not necessarily agree, but I'm allowed to hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't want to shut anyone down. Like freedom of speech. You're allowed to speak. I'm allowed to disagree.
Based.
I was on the fence with this one because my experience wasn't necessarily traumatizing, but it was definitely really uncomfortable. My entire family are all like staunch Republicans, Trump supporters, and I'm one of the only ones that have actually branched off of that and away from that. And so I was silenced pretty much because I was getting a lot of pushback and I was getting a lot of hate and kind of being bullied for my views and for speaking out against them and what they believe.
I feel like that's the one thing we have in common.
That's a good way of putting it. It was uncomfortable or it was upsetting. That's better than traumatic. But also, if something happens because of you changing, so like say you change your political views and then someone beats you up for it, well, then beating you up is traumatic. But it's not the changing political views is what is traumatic. Changing sides can be traumatic, I think, in a sense, especially being gay in San Francisco. If you even say one thing, conservative people will flip on you. You don't have to tell me that, sister. I mean, I literally got kicked off a gay men's soccer team in DC for being too problematic. So I'm well aware.
And I don't think all of us had a beautiful transitioning. Like I would like to put it in a positive way. It was the worst time of my life. I lost literally everything, which is weird because I always feel like I've been the same Emily. And as soon as you put politics in it, you're like this different person. I'm like, you guys, it's me. I've always been this person. But I will say, like, on a positive note, like I lost everything. And I'm so happy I did. I would not have my boyfriend, my friends, my career, my spirituality. I mean, it was the hardest and best thing that's ever happened to me. And if people go through that, I think you can either be a victim or it could be the most hardest, most beautiful thing you ever go through. And I could not be more thankful. I feel very, very lucky.
I think for me, it was less traumatizing and more empowering. I think knowledge is power. And I think when I started, I grew up, same as you guys, very, very religious and conservative, tightly knit family and community. And there was just a very limited allowance of what you could believe. And there was a very limited view of what America was, what America represented internationally.
So this is valid too, because I've met some people since I moved out here to the Midwest who grew up conservative, who grew up religious, and that when they became more liberal later in life, or they became less religious or stopped believing or whatever, they really were like excommunicated. I mean, or even if less than that, they just were like treated very poorly by conservative family members for thinking differently, for straying from their faith, or for asking questions. It's like, and if you do that, I don't care whether you're left or right, that is not a good way to treat people you love and treat people you care about.
And as a queer person, it was also, conservatives were not super welcoming. And so for me, leaving that space and realizing, oh, the United States is not the beacon of hope that we wish it were internationally, and queer people are allowed to be happy and fulfilled. It just, to me, it felt like freedom, and it felt like, oh, I now see how America became the world's strongest superpower. And there's a lot of issues that come along with that power. And with the freedom we have, it comes at the cost for a lot of other people around the world. And I think getting that information and knowledge, it made me feel like my eyes were opening to the real world and not just what was happening in my community and in this country.
The dual party system hurts America.
Let me know in the comments. What do you think? 92% yes. Yeah, facts.
Yeah. 1,000%.
Hey, everybody.
There's 350 million people in this country. There's no.
It says a lot that almost all of them, all but one, agreed on that the two-party system hurts America. I know, I sure think that, because there's way more than two perspectives. And so you have political parties that essentially become ideologically adrift and can fit people with wildly different views inside of them. And so at that point, what do they really stand for? And they become just about defending the party for the party's sake. Ugh.
No way, we all have two opinions.
Exactly.
And it's crazy too, because we were just talking at the beginning about cults, and it's like, how do we expect people to not become inevitably really divided and polarized if it's like, are you on the right side or the wrong side? And that's it, you know what I mean? So like, depending on who you ask, they're gonna tell you what they think is the right or the wrong side. But
when you were saying Robert Kennedy, you were saying, oh yeah, he would be a great candidate, and I think he would be able to maybe see both sides. Now he's running for an independent. How often does an independent or a non-Republican or Democrat win an election?
Yeah.
Maybe local, but not presidential election. So now we've maybe potentially lost a candidate that could see both sides and could actually make change. But when there's so much division on two sides, there's no way that the majority of people in the United States are actually going to get a change in the ways that they need it.
I think most people are more in the middle and like have a lot more that they agree on than they realize. But this two-party system, and especially the media, they keep us divided. They pit us against each other.
It's funny because I'm like, I actually should be there because I actually don't agree. I think the two-party system is working perfectly because we're all at each other's throats.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they want.
It's working for what they want.
It's working for what they want
Who's
and not
they?
for what we want.
Right.
So it's actually perfect.
who's they?
The establishment,
That's what I was gonna say.
the political leaders.
Yeah,
it's like you have a 50, you have a toss
entrenched
up, 50%
class.
chance of winning every election because the country's split right in half.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, exactly. It is the two mainstream parties who are interested in preserving the fact that there are only two parties. Like the Presidential Debate Commission that limits third-party candidates or independent candidates from getting on the debate stage with really high requirements is composed of half Democrats and half Republicans. Democrats and Republicans at the state level will disagree on everything, vote against each other, and then the one thing they come together for is to vote on bills to restrict third-party ballot access. So it is, Jen, I'm not the biggest fan of the duopoly, but I also don't think a third party is going to save us either. I don't think it will save us. I just think it's better to have more than two options. I'm a fan of ranked choice voting, at least in theory, because then I think people would be less reticent to try something different. Right now, it's like, well, because if I end up voting for third party, it's like, am I throwing my vote away? With ranked choice, it's like you could vote with your heart and then on the second round vote for it better, right? Or just narrow, just one or the other, and then you could kind of let people vote their conscience and then have a more pragmatic vote for the second round. Like, okay, if it has to be one of the two, I prefer this to that.
Right. And everyone has to be tribal, and we have to argue about things like whether or not trans people are trans or real people. And then it stops us from moving any sort of other conversation.
Straw man alert. He just said, argue about whether trans people are real people. No one has ever argued that they're not real people. What? Now they just are debating whether you can legitimately change your gender or your sex, and how, if there are really 97 million genders. But I don't like these straw mans. Oh, we don't have to argue about whether trans people exist. No one said they don't exist. In fact, many, especially the activists, make it quite aware. They make us quite aware that they exist. They're very vocal.
Moving forward.
Yeah. Right, like the RNC and the DNC have no incentive to have like more parties.
Which is
right?
why Congress puts forth any bills to change the way that elections are done, or that even getting people on the ballot from other parties is
well,
impossible.
we're like distracted fighting, so we don't know they're like poisoning our food and water, and we're all like literally dying.
Exactly.
And to Blake's point, like, I think a good illustration of this happened in the past couple years where the COVID policies first came down, the mandates and stuff. Yeah. They completely exploited this right-left thing, and they said, oh, wait, no, all the right people are over here and all the left people are over here. And, you know, the 70-something% possibly of people who just kind of follow went with their tribe. Mm-hmm. They successfully got us at each other's throats about policy, like mask and vax, and did you get it? Are you going to get it? Do you agree with the policy? Mm-hmm. And you know what happened? We forgot about, like, where did this virus come from? And now they've all come around, now that we've all been successfully fighting for years. Now they're all quietly in the mainstream media going like, it probably came from the lab that was studying viruses like this, like somehow it got out. Well, sorry, we didn't let you talk about that back then, because we would have come together.
Yeah, but if we came together, we'd all go after them.
Yeah.
That's why they don't want us to come together.
That's why they don't want that. Yeah.
They don't want us to see this middle ground.
I think my disagreement is pretty simple. The two-party system seems to be an inherent flaw within democracy, because if the answer is to have more political parties, I think that loses its efficiency. And if it's to become one, you know, it stops being a democracy. And where the two-party system fails, we should, you know, make some improvements. Whether the two-party systems are actually causing America harm, I think it's just the way, you know, America was designed.
Hold up. Nobody, my dude, nobody's saying only have one party. Nobody's saying that. It's like have 4, have 6, have 5, have 9, and then have coalitions like that, like how European democratic representative systems work. If we have to have parties, we should have more than 2. Does he not get how this works? But yet he's popping off.
Yeah. Why can't we change it? They don't want it to be changed.
Because they're making billions.
But what would you change it to?
Well, that's, do you have...
What would we change it to? It's like he's never heard of the fact that there are multi-party systems all across parliamentary democracies in Europe and all sorts of other places. Bro.
Well,
you have 10
I
hours?
would say,
you have like 85 days?
Well, what I would say is that, you know, getting down to one political party would, you know, it would seem, you know, totalitarian in essence. But, you know, I think, you know, a lot of totalitarian societies, if there is a good moral head of that government, you know, it could do a lot of good.
Yeah.
Did he just say a totalitarian society with a dictator can do a lot of good? Maybe in theory. In practice, mostly leads to mass graves, but go off, I guess.
I would say Singapore, it's illegal to spit gum on the floor, and that's because of their totalitarian government, I'm pretty sure. And, you know, but it also promotes, you know, decency.
Like Dubai, it's like you can't go over there and yell and like shake your butt in a thong, and like I think that is, like not okay to do either, and that's kind of totalitarian over there as well.
Are they simping for totalitarian regimes right now in the land of the free and the home of the brave, and they're calling themselves the conservatives on this panel? Make that make sense.
Those are like very little things that you're giving up to have no control over your own life.
Like Saudi Arabia also is another example. Is like you will chop your hand off literally if you steal, and as a result there is no crime. Imagine living somewhere where zero crime.
But there's no freedom.
Zero crime.
You will literally either. And again, if we want to talk about biased statistics, totalitarian government is not going to be delivering accurate statistics from within when they're saying, hey, look, we chop everybody's hands off when they steal. And now crime is at 0%.
Well, and people feel like if they vote for a third party that you're giving it to the other side.
Yes, that's what I did in the Hillary versus Trump election. I voted for Jill Stein, and when I was doing it, I was like, oh, I'm so passionate about it. I'm so passionate about it because renewable energy, green energy, whatever. And then I left the ballot, and I was like, oh no, wait, hold on, is that just going to be kind of like thrown to the side? And
It's not. It's just a process. It takes time to change, and I think.
So this is interesting. Like, are you throwing away your vote when you vote third party? I would say no, because here's the thing. If you don't do that, if you never vote third party, no matter how crappy the candidate that your party you lean towards puts up is, they have no incentive to change, right? They have no incentive to do anything different. If you're still going to, at the end of the day, suck it up and get in line and vote for them. But if you actually are willing to say, nope, that candidate, not good enough. I'm not willing to vote for that crazy person, or they are not close enough to my values. Well, if you do that and you vote third party and enough people do that it affects the outcome, the party will listen and they'll take note because they want to win next time. So you're not going to, at least anytime soon, elect someone voting third party, but you can send a message. And if enough people do it, the two parties, they will respond. They will listen.
I think instead of like trying to go to like a more restricted society, it's like, how can we fix democracy? And so it's like, how can we actually put power back into the hands of the people? And voting third party, it may not be this generation even that sees the benefit, but it's gonna take one person. I think if Bernie Sanders or Trump had run third party, it would have been a much different scenario. But people are afraid to leave the system, and RFK is trying it now, so we'll see what happens, but it's even hard to get on the ballot as a third party right now.
I am still aligned with certain policies from my former political beliefs.
Oh, that's interesting.
I know the prompt said policies, but I'm definitely still okay with certain things that are generally seen more as like the conservative thing. I sometimes do agree with conservatives about like people being too sensitive, for example. Like I think that's definitely a problem, or the cancel culture thing, I think is a totally like a fair issue that is like a very real problem that can be talked about. So, yeah.
I think when I thought of policies, I was thinking of I immediately went to the economy because, why are we going so far overseas and billions, trillions of dollars go overseas, but there are people that are literally outside a Starbucks starving. And I'm like, what's going on? Why can't we help this person? And that's where the conflict comes, because I'm like, hold on, wait, this is a more conservative idea. However, it's also a humanitarian, which I believe is the root of it, is we just need to get to
So I'll say this, if you aren't aligned with a single belief from the other side, if you go from one side to 100% the other, that suggests to me you're not really critically thinking about each issue in turn. You're just going from red to blue or blue to red. You're going from one NPC, non-thinking, embrace of a full agenda to the opposite. So if you're actually critically thinking through each issue, what are the odds you're going to be all to one side on every single one? Not great. So most of the time, if somebody's 100% one way and doesn't have any nuance or any differing opinions, they're probably outsourcing a lot of their thinking to tribalism.
Common ground with that.
Yeah, that's literally
That's
me.
how
I'm
I
like, America
feel.
first.
Yeah, I was gonna say make America great again. That's not old school Bush conservatism.
No.
You know what
And
I mean?
It's funny 'cause I'm like, why are we worrying about them when there is people literally starving in front of me, and I'm still pro-choice. That's an extremely liberal thing in my community. And other than that, I care about the planet. I care about the animals.
Woke.
I care about
I
care about regenerative farming. I think that should be the biggest issue being discussed right now.
Yeah.
The soil is, we die without it, and that is something not many people on the right are touching, and those are huge issues for me.
Yeah, and getting back to indigenous cultures and letting the indigenous nations.
They know what they're doing.
They know,
and we destroyed it.
Well, exactly. We have a country, a territory, Puerto Rico, that's literally impoverished and in crumbles due to all the natural disasters, and yet we deny it.
And the better we help ourselves, the more we can help them. We got to get our shit straight.
I think that I came out here to say I still hold a lot of the positions I held on the left, and it's kind of funny because I think what's left and right has changed. We don't even know what's up and what's down anymore, because I always thought when I was in the left for 20 years,
Yeah, what's left and what's right absolutely has changed. I mean, when I was young, before I was awakened in politics, it's Republicans were super hawks. They were neoconservatives. George Bush, wars, rah, rah, rah. Then you have Trump and America First and people being anti-interventionist. You have Republicans used to be more pro-immigration than they are now. And I like their old stance better, to be honest. You had liberals used to be more moderate on economics and have become the party of Bernie Sanders by and large in the Democratic Party. So the parties have changed a good bit. I do think that's a good point.
I marched against the Iraq War. I was anti-corporations, anti-big pharma, anti-war, and now I feel like things have switched to such a degree that it's more of the right who's voicing those concerns when it comes to questioning big pharma, questioning corporations. And so I don't even know if that's accurate to say I hold opinions that the left holds, because I don't know if they hold them anymore.
So I don't agree with any of the values that I previously had. I used to be a black supremacist. I used to be anti-American. I used to be a feminist. I used to be an ally. And as I've collected new information and evolved my understanding of the world, I am now pro-American. I see the alphabet community as an acronym for sexual perversions. I see feminism as inherently misogynistic and offensive, honestly. And I see...
Isn't that the same guy who said conservatives don't get offended? He's giving NPC, to be honest. He's giving that he used to drink all the dark blue Kool-Aid and now he switched to the dark red Kool-Aid. He's giving NPC.
My past black supremacist ways and a lot of pro-black things as very racist. And so it's a flip-flop, and I'm used to be pro-choice. I definitely not. It's obviously the murder of unborn humans, and I just think it's crazy that we don't see that. And there's no way I could ever go back to holding those beliefs because it just would be wrong.
Never say never, because you've already changed once.
Never.
Good point.
I don't
You've
really
already
hold
flip-flopped your whole identity once.
any conservative values. I'm sure there's some you could find that I'd be like, oh, that's not terrible. I don't really hold a lot of democratic values. I consider myself more a progressive populist.
No, I'm just kidding.
So I think both sides have failed this country and the people in it massively, and I think everyone here actually kind of agrees with that. But we continue to bolster up the two political party system. I think, like I said, neither of them have worked. Our country is eroding and deteriorating. You can't blame just one party, because every 8 years the White House changes colors, and it's blue and now it's red, and it's blue and it's red. Congress flips back and forth, and neither party has been able to consistently stay in power because they both suck. So we get one, we hate it, we switch, we hate it, we switch. So I tend to think it all needs to be kind of wiped away, rebuilt, and rethought. I think the experiment has failed.
Yeah. That's fair. And both sides have their extreme, you know, far left and far right. And like most people are generally in the middle, but like I feel like there's nuance in things, and people forget that there's like, you know, it doesn't have to be so black and white. It doesn't have to be one extreme or the other. And say, you know, with different policies like abortion, for example, like, you know, we can be, you know, pro-choice, but like agree that there should be like a limit on when you should be able to abort the baby. Like there's things that people should be able to debate and discuss and like come to, you know, a compromise on, whatever it is. There's layers to things, and I just think that we're just such a black and white society. Right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's a pretty good point. But yeah, I don't know. These people seem too agreeable. Like they're kind of all just agreeing with each other, and except for the one dude on the far right, he's like not agreeing with anything. But I did want to take a sec to read the super chat from Ghost Cruncher. He says, "Thank you for what you do. You're a breath of fresh air from all the extremists." So thank you for your support. And guys, if you do enjoy this live stream, do consider dropping a super chat, because when I've reacted to Jubilee in the past, they do claim the ad revenue. So otherwise, I'll just be volunteering for you all today. So let's get back to this.
Right now, I feel like we just are so like
That's what I don't like
extreme
with
one side or the
Republicans.
other, and that's why it's good when we can have like we can come in and say, yeah, like I agree with this policy on this side, but this policy on this side, you know.
And like, instead of just being like, we're banning abortion, like, can we just find a middle ground?
Right.
Because we just keep losing on this subject, and I'm tired of losing.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
People are dying.
But whether you agree with them or not, you just said people are dying. Someone with that viewpoint, they would say, yes, millions of unborn babies.
Yeah, that's
Like they view it as, even if you don't agree, It's the loss of a human life is more important to them than allowing the government to have the say over what a woman does with her body. They prioritize it here. I'm still pro-choice, which I know also, my opinions on abortion have been in flux for a few years. We should become more accustomed to saying, I'm thinking about this thing for a long time.
Yeah, and like that's why I don't hate on them, because I think it's beautiful, and I'm also like a weird Republican. I'm literally pro-choice, but I go, no, you're literally murdering a baby, and I believe it's spiritually demonic. I still want someone to have that right, which is a weird thing.
That actually makes no sense to me. I can understand pro-choice, like, oh, it's just a clump of cells, so you should be able to do whatever you want. I can understand pro-life. It's a baby. You shouldn't be able to kill a baby. It's a baby, and yes, you should be able to kill it. Girl?
Because I'm saying multiple
it's
horrible
rational.
things.
Well, I mean, you know what's interesting is who I think you were saying, like, the experiment has failed, and it's like, I think we've strayed so far away from the experiment. I actually think we have to go back to the Constitution, which people have been abandoning on both sides. I'm not going to say one side more than the other. People have been abandoning the Constitution on both sides. Right. So, you know, and so I don't even disagree with you. I don't think the experiment has failed. I think that we've gone away from what the experiment was supposed to be. I think we have to take a good hard look at the Constitution and say, what does this say? This is the supreme law of the United States. And there's a lot of people who that's inconvenient for. And good, it should be inconvenient for the government. It should be absolutely inconvenient for the government. Yeah. But anyway, that's what I think.
I love that.
All right. Thank
you.
All right, guys, that was actually fun. That was a good Jubilee video. They weren't all screaming at each other. Nobody threatened anybody like Miss Blossom. And so I actually enjoyed watching that with all of y'all. If you're still here, hit the like button, comment, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. Let me know in the comments if you like this live stream format, if you want me to do more of it, what videos you'd like to see me go live and react to. And with that, guys, I will see you all next time.